Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly show of What is School For? My name is Dr. I. I'm the CEO of Classroom Without Walls and the host of this weekly live streaming show. On this show, I interview leading education professionals, parents, students, business leaders, entrepreneurs to come here to discuss, debate, and disrupt education. The goal is to future proof the next generation. Today, I'm really excited and honored to have another teacher turned entrepreneur and Domari Dickinson on the show to talk about how to identify and break toxic parenting patterns. Domari is an education consultant and a parenting coach. She's also the founder of Positive and Purposeful Parenting, which is, I think, many parents' ideal state, right? We want to parent with ease and with confidence, no more yelling, no more screaming, and everything is going fine. So that is what we're going to discuss today. Super excited. As I said earlier, Domari is also a teacher turned entrepreneur, so I really resonate with her story. And as always, a big shout out to StreamYard for being a sponsor of Classroom Without Walls. So in the comment section, there is a link that allows you to check out StreamYard for free for 2 weeks. Give it a try and let me know if you have any questions. We are live on all the social media channels. Domari and I were just talking about how much she doesn't like social media. I'm like on the other extreme. So we are live on all the social media channels, including Amazon Live. I highly recommend that you join us live on Amazon Live, where you are going to see a list of books that I personally reviewed. And I really recommend those books are relevant and related to education, parenting, unschooling, and the problems in education. So if you just enter Classroom Without Walls live, you will be able to join us live on Amazon Live. So without any further ado, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hello, hello. I'm so excited to be here, even though we are on all the social media platforms.
I'm super excited. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us live. And let me know in the comment section where you guys are joining us live from, social media wise and geographically speaking. I just love my global community. So thank you so much for being here with us. So to kick off the conversation today, Domari, you and I, we are both long-term educators. And so you have been in education for almost 2 decades. You look so young. Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
so I'm curious, how is your perspective on education today different your perspective on education when you just became a school teacher?
Yeah. So first, I want to just correct the pronunciation of my name. It's Domari, and people say it all different ways, but I want to make sure that because it is a name that represents my ancestors, who are Dora, Martha, Mary, and Mary, it's important to me to make sure that we
Aww.
correctly. So it's Domari, but my view on education has changed completely, right from the beginning. I come from a line of educators. So my dad was a teacher, my mom was a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher, her mother was a teacher. And I said I was never going into education, ever, 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 because I wanted to be different, right? I didn't want to do what everybody else in my family was doing. So I went to college and got a degree in math because it was easy to me, and computer science because everyone said that's what I could do to get the most money. Finished college, went to grad school because people said you can get more money if you go to grad school, right? And I was playing this schooling game and got to Johns Hopkins in a PhD program, and I hated it. And I was miserable. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I left after a year, started teaching, and never turned back, right? It was what I loved to do. It's what I was supposed to be doing, even though I was fighting it. But I feel like when I first came into education, I thought that schooling, right, that education was the way out for me, for people who were like me. So I came in, I started working in Baltimore City with high school kids, and I was like, I'm going to love on these babies, and I'm going to make sure that they do well in school because that was going to equal success in life for them. And then I realized that wasn't really the case. And it took me some time, right? So I had been in the system. I was a classroom teacher in high school, moved down to middle school, moved to New York, started teaching again. And my views started to shift and really see like what I'm doing is not preparing these kids for success, right? And even worse, I started realizing it's the opposite. Like I'm really helping this system that was designed to oppress these kids. And I'm, even when I left the classroom, I started coaching teachers at being really good at oppressing the kids, right? And getting them to comply. And it wasn't ever about learning. So now I realized that learning happens everywhere, right? And that kids naturally want to learn. And it doesn't have to be in this school building at this time, in this way, according to these random standards that somebody decided was important. And that this joy of learning in my classroom, right? When I was working with teachers, it was like, well, how can I get kids to like learning? And that's the question is, how can we stop taking that joy away from the kids? Because they naturally love to learn, right? We beat it out of them in school. And so now it's going back to the basics, right? They come into this world wanting to learn, wanting to know more, and they get that from their environment, right? And so now I really believe that it should be. So I'm an unschooling mom now. I have 4 kids, 2 of which are home right now. So you might hear them in the background playing Fortnite against each other. And so my youngest are unschoolers, right? And they are in charge of their learning because I think that's how we get them engaged. That's how we get them motivated. That's how we help really prepare them for interacting in the world in a way that's real, right? That's natural, where they have this freedom and autonomy. So it's changed a bunch. And it was a really hard transition, especially when I started doing this liberation work and working with parents and I was still in the system. That tug was there. And I was like, I don't really think this is right, but maybe I can make a difference, right? Maybe I can start changing some things in these schools. And this is the first year that I was saying earlier that I'm actually out of the classroom. So I'm not working with teachers in terms of coaching. I'm not, teaching any classes in school. I still do math tutoring because it's what brings me joy. So I have to have a little bit of that in my life. So I do still work with students in that capacity. But the shift has been a long time coming. And it was really difficult because I had to face all of the ways that I was complicit in that system, right? So once I knew better, I was like, oh my gosh, I did all these things to these poor babies. And I still feel bad about that. I know I can't change it, but now I can work to make sure that other kids are able to be free and learn the way that they want to.
Yeah. Oh my God. I feel like you were just like talking about my script.
Yeah.
Because one kind of big aha moment that really triggered my resignation was I realized that as a college professor, 70% of what I did was to perpetuate the broken education model. And only 30% of what I did was actually serving the students. And I think that is very wrong. And I want you said earlier, exactly as what I mentioned, you said that what I'm doing in the classroom is not helping those students. And can you elaborate more on this? And exactly what were you doing that were not actually helping the students so that everyone can really know exactly what is happening? Because just last week we were talking about on the show, we were talking about this tendency that many parents want to outsource their children's education. Yep. And they feel like if I send my kid to a school, everything will be taken care of. Because I feel like many parents don't even know what is actually happening inside the classroom, especially inside the education model. So can you share with us what exactly you were doing that you felt like were not serving the students?
Yeah. And I think it's a lot, right? And I think I agree with when you say like parents are sending their kids to these schools assuming the best, right? Like the teachers know what they're doing, that they understand the content, that they actually care about their kids. And having been on the other side of that, right, as an instructional coach, I know that all of those things are not true. Me specifically, I'm going to try not to cry, right? Because I still feel guilty about this. And it wasn't that like I was a horrible person. I showed up for love for all of my kids, right? And, I still have students last week, one of my students that I haven't taught in 15 years was like, hey, Miss D, can I borrow $20? And I'm like, sure, absolutely. Because we had those relationships. But it was still, they came into my classroom and I was forcing them to show up in a certain way, right? In a way that made me feel good about myself as a teacher, right? So I want you to come in and perform. Akilah Richards says, like, we're performing the studenthood. Be a good student, show up. So be quiet in class when I need you to be quiet. Even like when I was teaching middle school, it was to the point where their bodies had to be a certain way. Their hands had to be a certain way. Their eyes had to always be on me. And now I know, especially with one of my children who is neurodivergent, it's like that is not realistic for every student. Like that is not what is best for that student long term or even in the moment, right? So just putting these unrealistic expectations on kids to perform. And it really wasn't even about them, right? It wasn't because this is how you will learn better, which is what I was trained to believe. And so I did. But it was about this is what makes this classroom look good. So if someone comes in and all of my kids are silent and all looking at the board, it looks like they're learning. But that's not even true, right? So I didn't initially have the tools, right? Or even the desire to question these things. I was just like, yes, this is what good students look like. This is what good teaching looks like. This is what, you have to do the work this way because this is how you can prove it on this standardized test. It wasn't that flexibility of saying, oh, well, if this is what makes sense to you, sure, you don't have to show your work this way. Or it was very by the books, which limited a lot of kids in terms of being able to show what they understood, what they know. And now looking back, I'm like, let me go back and do that all over again, because I know that I would still be getting the same messages from above, right? In terms from the administration saying like, this is what it should look like. But I would have fought harder to really allow myself and my kids to show up in a way that allowed us to be free as we were learning.
Wow, that is so refreshing to hear, because oftentimes when it comes to learning, the word free, autonomy, we rarely hear it because everything is so standardized, everything is so structured. So we have a great comment here from someone joining us live on LinkedIn and talking about, how this person's own upbringing was very chaotic, and find this person finding him or herself noticing and trying to correct bad parenting habits. And normally after already starting, yelling at the kids, had a big fight. So you are an expert. That's kind of our discussion today. How to identify and how to break those toxic patterns. And so what do you say to that question?
Yeah, I think that two things about that. One, it's identifying that your upbringing has something to do with that, right? And I think a lot of people miss that. And it's just we're parenting on autopilot and we're just doing the same things to our kids that were done to us without questioning, right? Something I just mentioned. So I think the fact that you're like, hey, these things are happening and I don't like that is the first step. Just identifying what those things are. So even if you're just noticing, every time my child does this, I am triggered, right? I get into the same toxic pattern, the same cycle, and I want to stop that. So that's like, what is that behavior? Like, what is it that's happening with your child that's making you respond in that way, right? And I think once you identify it, you can say, okay, is this something that I can explore a little bit deeper, right? And so one of my favorite questions is just why? So why does that behavior, that particular behavior, bother me so much, right? Like, why am I responding this way? And this is a really hard question to ask and answer, because a lot of times it does go back to our childhood, right? When we're like, oh, it's because, when I did this as a kid, I got a spanking for it. And so now that's what I think is the appropriate response, is to spank my child. Right. But a lot of times that why is so deeply rooted in like these systems of oppression or in our own childhood or in some trauma that happened to us before, that we've got to dig really deep to find it. So like identifying what that behavior is, why you're responding that way. And then saying like, what's the story that I'm telling myself about that behavior so that I can tell a different story. So, for example, I'm doing a parenting course, and this is the topic that we're doing this week. So if the example is like, when my child whines, I feel annoyed and I yell at them, right? Or I keep yelling to make them stop whining. So you're asking yourself, like, why is whining a trigger for me? why does whining bother me? And if you're able to trace it back to something like, maybe it was because when you were younger, your younger sibling used to whine and get what she wanted, right? And so you look at it like manipulation, because you're like, she wasn't really upset. She was just whining to get her way. And so now in your mind, you're connecting your child's behavior to that old story, right? To that old trauma, to that old memory. And you're like, oh, this really isn't about my child. It's about before, when my younger sibling used to do it, and it used to make me feel like it's manipulation, right? And so recognizing that it's not about your child in that moment, and then saying, instead of me thinking my child is trying to manipulate me when they're whining, what else might be true? What else can I say? Maybe it's they don't have the words to really express how they're feeling in the moment. So then it goes from like, instead of me just responding with yelling and telling them to stop whining, and then they don't, of course, because there's something else behind the whining, and then I want to spank them. It's now I can say, like, what can I do to help my child in this moment? So shifting that story helps us shift our response to say, instead of me taking this behavior as an attack, on me personally, or as me as a parent, or, something that I feel like I have to fix or stop right now, let me look at it as an opportunity for me to partner with my child and to help them, and saying, like, what else might be true, and what else can I do to help this situation? None of that is easy, right? I can talk about it in 2 minutes, but that's a long process. And I think that's one of the differences between like how I'm parenting now and how I was parented, or how I was even parenting 10 years ago. Because with this fear-based parenting, or this control-based parenting, you can get results really quickly, right? Like, I can smack my child, send them to their room, and I don't have to hear the whining anymore. But with positive and purposeful parenting, or conscious parenting, or connected parenting, or peaceful parenting, whatever you want to call it, the results might not come immediately, right? It might take, after the 10th time of us working through this whining cycle, now my child is starting to practice these other tools so they don't have to whine. But it takes time. And in that time, you have to have faith and believe that it's worth it. And to know, like, I think it's why it's important to have a vision for your family, to say, this is what I'm working towards. I want us to have this relationship, right? I don't want my child to be afraid of me. I want them to trust me, to be able to talk to me about anything, for us to have a really close relationship. And me responding in this toxic way, right, in my triggered state, it's not going to get me there. So I have to know that even though, I might still be yelling, but I'm working on it, that work is moving me closer to my goal.
Yeah, I love this. I have so many follow-up questions, and I definitely trigger is definitely a thing, because my husband and I, we grew up in different countries, and like, he is being triggered by very different things from how I'm being triggered. I grew up in China, very the complete opposite of unschooling. Everything's extremely structured, lots of exams, like very, very, very intense.
Yeah.
And so one of my triggers is that even though we homeschool our kids, I think we do a combination of homeschooling and unschooling. And sometimes I will discover myself at the end of the day, I will ask my kid, what did you do today? What did you do today? So sometimes I feel like learning is only like, doing the worksheets, because that is how I was being raised, as a kid, work hundreds of exams and worksheets, workbooks, things like that. So that is definitely a trigger for me. So when you are being emotionally triggered, what do you do? Like, when you have that animal brain is kicking in, you have amygdala hijacking moment, you're just like being so triggered. Like, what I feel like, I will be saying things that I regret like 5 minutes later or an hour later. So in that emotionally triggered state, can you give us some advice to help parents, stop from saying things that we may regret a few minutes later? So what are some strategies that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think it's really about, one, knowing that I don't think the goal is really to never be triggered. I don't know that we get to this enlightened point where nothing ever bothers us and we're never triggered.
We wish, right?
Yeah. Right? But it's really about the response to the trigger. And there's no one way to respond, right? I think it's about finding what works for you and what feels good for you in that moment. So for some people, for myself included, in that moment when I see myself going down this path, because I see it coming, right? And a lot of times we feel like even once we've started, that we have to commit, right? We've got to go all in. Like, well, now I'm yelling, so now I've got to just keep yelling and follow through with the punishment because I've gone down that road. But it's okay to stop and to just say, you know what? I don't like what I'm doing right now, so I'm gonna just stop. And you don't have to have the answers in that moment. You don't have to know what to do next. You don't have to know what to say next. You don't have to have a solution in that moment, but you can just stop and say, I'm not going to do this. I feel myself going down that road and I'm not going to do that. For me, breathing in that moment helps. For me, reminding myself that I love my kids and they have little baby brains helps me to just recenter and refocus and be like, they're not your enemy, right? You're in this together. You got to show up in love. And for years, okay, not days, not weeks, for years, I just had to practice that pause. I just had to stop. I didn't know what to do next. And my kids were so confused because they're looking at me like, what do we do? What's happening? I'm like, I don't know, but I'm not going to hit you. I don't know, but I'm not going to yell. Right. And once I started proving to myself that I could pause and do something different, it got easier. And so it's not that I don't yell now. I don't do it very often. Right. And part of what I practice is that when I do have that rupture in our relationship, when I do show up in a way that doesn't feel good to me, I go back and I repair it. Right. I own it and say, you know what? I messed up. I shouldn't have done that. My bad. Next time, I'm going to try something different. Right. And then work on really figuring out what I can do to shift that behavior. And that, just to be transparent, right? That repair, it used to be, I did something and then like maybe the next day I would come back and repair it. And then it was, okay, before they go to bed, I'm going to repair it. Now it's to the point where I could just stop and be like, that was ridiculous. And my kids and I will laugh about it. And I'll be like, can I try it again? Let me try it again. Okay. And then I'll get to try it again. Because they know that it's coming. I know that they're giving me the grace to mess up the same way that I extend them grace to make mistakes. Right. And I think knowing that I don't have to be perfect, which was not a message that I got growing up. Right. But knowing that I don't have to be a perfect mom. Right. And my kids aren't expecting that. And I'm not expecting them to be perfect has made it so much easier for me to fix these cycles. Right. To say, oh my God, this is wrong. I don't know how to fix it, but it's wrong. And then together, that partnership piece, we get to say like, well, what if you just try this? Right. Maybe you can do this instead. And so in those moments, I really realize how amazing my kids are because they give me suggestions. Well, Mom, what if you try this? Maybe you just need to take a break. And I'm like, you're right. Time out. Let me just go think about this and come back. And can we talk about it later? So I think really experimenting with things that help your body and help you feel safe. Because like you mentioned, when you're in that downstairs brain, you're not thinking logically, right? You are in that heightened state. So it's like, what will make me feel safe? Is it something that I can say to myself to feel safe in the moment? This is for me. So this helps me, right? With my hand on my chest and feeling my breathing helps me feel safe in the moment. Is it something that I can imagine, right? Let me close my eyes and picture myself on the beach, listening to the waves, feeling the sun on my face. Like that helps me calm down. But like nobody can tell you what that is for you. You've got to try different things to see what actually works. And it's probably multiple things that might work in different situations. But just knowing that there is something that needs to happen in that moment to switch the part of your brain that's currently activated so that you can show up in a way where you are able to reason, where you are feeling safe. And so that you can pass that same feeling on to your kids.
Oh wow! I mean I love this entire process. Definitely, I think the first step is being aware of this process and then kind of intentionally stop the pattern, right? Like take a break. And I love all those things that you mentioned. So did you notice any changes in your relationship with your kids after you become more conscious? Can you talk more about that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. And these when I tell these stories, I have permission from my kids to share these stories. So it's not like me telling their business behind their backs. But my oldest son used to lie all the time. All right. And that was a trigger for me because I'm like, why are you lying?
He started doing the clap. Now it's a big trigger for me.
Yes, because for me, it felt like you don't respect me enough to tell me the truth. That was a story that I had to unpack that I was telling myself. And when I kept going with like the why is he doing this? Why? I realized I wasn't creating an environment that made it safe for him to tell the truth. So when he made mistakes, it was not accepted. It was very much punished, right? And so I had to make that shift and create a safe space for him to tell the truth. Now, again, this took years. And so initially when I would ask him something, and I had to stop asking questions to set him up, right? So I would know that he did something and I'd be like, so like, who did this? Did you do this? And he'd be like, his trauma response was to freeze. And so he wouldn't say anything. He would just stare at me like, which would enrage me even more. Like, I know you hear me and I know you understand what I'm saying, right? What did you do? Why are you doing this? And because I used to gather this information, not to help me figure out what we could do better next time, but to punish him. He knew that. So he didn't want to give me the information. But once I, changed my response and I'm just like, it's okay. I didn't use that information to punish. I'm just like, okay, cool. Thanks for telling me. Right. Over time, he started to believe that I was a safe space, right? That I was a safe person. So now it's not even that he lies about things. He volunteers information. So he'll say, Mom, I went upstairs. I don't know how I did it, but I knocked your picture off the wall. Just wanted to let you know.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, it's not the end of the world, but is it something that we can fix? Wow. Totally different relationship, right? And it wasn't because I fixed him. I fixed myself, right? I had to do the work so that I could show up in a way that made what I want, honesty, transparency, right, easy and in our home. So that's one of like my biggest wins, and it's huge, right? Another thing that's changed. So my oldest daughter, who's 20, who I didn't start this journey until my youngest daughter was born. So she's 6, right? So my oldest was parented, fear-based, control-based, all the foolishness.
Like what most parents do, yes.
Right? And so I was really good at it too. Let me just say that, really good at it. And so part of what made me shift to this conscious, positive, purposeful parenting was seeing how it impacted her as she started getting older. And I was like, oh, this is not good. Like, she doesn't speak up for herself. She doesn't feel comfortable talking to me. I don't like this. And she initially would always say, like, she didn't want kids. I don't want kids. I don't want to be a mom. And I knew it was because of our relationship, right? Now she's like, when I have kids, and I'm like, you want to have kids? Like, she's like, yeah. Like, and now she's working with kids, and I see her implementing these strategies to help other kids be free, to help other kids have a voice, to help other kids feel loved. And I'm just like, okay. Like, this is not just helping our family. Like, this is impacting other kids and other families and, the next generations of kids. So it's been a lot. It's changed
amazing.
a lot.
That's amazing to see that. It also gives us hope, right? It is never too late to change. Even though you started parenting differently when she is a little bit older, you're still seeing like big substantial improvement. That is very encouraging to hear. Yeah.
People ask that a lot because they're like, well, my child is, 13 or they're already in college. Is it too late to change? And I'm like, it's not, but it might take longer for you to get to the point where you want to be, because there's more things that you have to undo, right? There's more trust that you have to build and really to prove that you are serious about making these changes. So it's been a longer road with my oldest daughter, but again, it's not impossible. Like, we're still to this day continuing to make progress.
Yeah, I love it. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. Is from I forgot his name, talking about the illiterate. He said that the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So I think with being a parent, we also need to go through this process. I learned how to be a mom from watching my mom, and we need to unlearn that process and relearn a new way to parent with a stronger sense of like purpose and be more positive. Yeah, I love it. And so earlier, you were talking about right now how you parent is that you do more unschooling. For those of us who are not very familiar with unschooling, so can you briefly tell us what is unschooling and maybe share a typical day. I know there are no typical days. Maybe just like a, yesterday,
Today.
or like yeah,
I can share
memorable
today.
day. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, they're just like anything when it comes to education. There are a bunch of different ways that you can define unschooling. But for us, it's really about child-led learning and letting our kids lead the way. So it's about trusting them to know what they want to learn, how they want to learn, what that's going to look like, and me being a resource to help them with that. So really giving them the freedom and the space and the autonomy
Mhm.
to own their own learning. So for us, my kids right now are 6, 10, and 11. My boys, the 10 and 11-year-olds, are very much into gaming. So there is really no typical day. Their sleep schedules kind of vary based on who they're playing with, what they're doing at the time. But last night, my 6-year-old, who we don't do any like formal curriculum, so there isn't like, what is it, hooked on phonics or like teach your child to read. We haven't done any of that, but she is starting to read now. And last night she pulled out one of my son's old math books and just started doing math. I was like, "Can you show me how to do this one and how to do this?" And it was because she overheard me during one of my classes yesterday teaching, and she was like, "I want to learn how to do this." Now I was teaching a third grader. My daughter is 6, so she would be in first grade. And I'm not saying like you're not ready for that, right? You can't do that yet. That's third grade math. And I'm like, if you want to learn about decimals, like let's do it, right? So here's the money. But the math that she's learned is from life, right? So like she's really good at addition and subtraction because her and her brothers have schedules for when they can use the iPad. So she has to know like, oh, I have 20 more minutes and then it's my turn, or in 17 minutes. So her clock math is better than mine. Like not even lying, because that's what matters to her, right? So it's the idea that they will learn what they need as they need it. So there isn't this pressure to say, oh, you would be in third grade now, so that means you have to learn all the presidents and the states and the capitals. But it's like, no, as we're traveling and we're going to these places, if you want to learn about this state that we're going to, then you can learn about the capital. But right now, my daughter's interested in artwork, so she draws and paints a lot. She's interested in music, so she makes up her own songs. She's learning how to play the piano through an app on her iPad. The boys are interested in gaming, and one was coding, but now it's more towards gaming. So they spend a lot of their time like learning how to be the best at that game. So it's free, right? Which frees me up. It took me a while to get here as a former educator, but frees me up from feeling like I have to be the keeper of all knowledge, right? Or I have to know how to do all of these things. I don't, but we get to learn together if they want me to. Most of the time now, outside of my 6-year-old, the boys are like, "You, mom, we don't need you. Like, we got this. We have the tools that we need to figure out what we need to know." They're excited about sharing the things that they learn with me. So my son just came down and tell me something that I didn't understand about some frames per second on some game. And I'm just like, I don't really know. Got a whole degree in computer science, but I have no idea what you're talking about, sir. And he's 10, right? Um, so I mean, it looks different every day. What it never looks like is me telling them what they have, what homework they have, or what work they have to do. It is me being curious about what they're learning, and we have a lot of conversation so that I can understand what they're learning, not because I have to present it to someone or prove it to someone. It's because again, I'm interested and I want to know, and I want to know how I can support them. Like, what tools do you need to be able to do the things that you want to do right now?
Yeah, yeah. Fascinating. I'm just seeing my 10 years old is actually watching us live in the comment. He's just, wow, wow. He's like, mommy, I want that.
And people are so nervous, right? And I was too. I am people
That is actually
about,
a nice question. Like, do you
yeah,
ever feel like scared? Like,
all the
wow.
time. All the time. There's still times that I'm like, am I doing this right? Like, are they really learning? And then those are the times when I realize like I'm not paying enough attention, right? I'm not involved in their world enough to see because they're always learning, right? And always growing and always interested in something. It's not always what I'm interested in, right? Or what I have been taught to value as important. Um, but watching my daughter, and so my daughter is really the one that's like helping me be okay with this unschooling, because
Wow.
she learned how to read without me, right? Her math skills are phenomenal without me ever having to sit down and like teach her math. because
Okay.
life.
You have to say that. Yeah, that is crazy. That is very hard to believe.
I did not think I'm a math educator. Okay. I didn't think it was going to happen, but it's from life. So we were in the car and I don't know how it works. I just know that it's working. So she's like, Mommy, how fast are you going? And she's looking at the speedometer and I'm like, I'm going 60. And she's like, it says 60 and 80. So the one halfway in between is 70. And I'm like, it is, but how did you not? Like, we haven't done number lines and show, like, if you go 10 from here and 10, like, we've never had discussions about that. But her, whatever math she's been doing is helping her with her, just her understanding, which I laugh all the time because this is what we're trying to teach kids in school, right? Especially now with Common Core. To watch her do math, she'll say, like, oh, I know that 6 plus 5 is 11. And I'm like, how do you know? She's like, well, because 5 plus 5 is 10. And then one more, 6 is one more than 5. So we're trying to systematize that in schools, right? To teach kids to think that way. But she automatically does it because that's what makes sense to her brain, right? And I'm just like, it's so beautiful because it's a reminder that they already have the skills. We just have to let them be. I didn't believe that because it was my ego, right? I'm like, I was a teacher for all these years. You mean to tell me that I didn't really have anything that I had to do? Like, okay, when they get to higher math, right? So people are like, but what about calculus? First of all, I've never, since I took calculus, used that again in life. Okay, let's say that. Let me just say that. So if they choose to go down a path that requires them to know that, they are able to learn, right? So they can learn that because they understand how to learn. People get so scared, like, well, what if they want to go to college? Then they get to go to college. Like, there are entrance exams that they can take, they can prepare for. And because they know how to think, they know how to learn, they'll be able to do that if that's what they choose to do. What I'm not going to do is stress them out about learning how to write paragraphs and essays and all this foolishness until they need to do it. Because why? What's the point? Right?
Yeah.
What's the point of teaching them all these skills, and stressing about it and having this as a point of contention in our house if they're not applying it? So it's never the question of, when am I going to use this in real life? Right? It's like, oh my gosh, I need to do this thing in real life and I need these skills to help me do it. Can you help me get these skills? And I'm like, yes. Even my son, who was like, well, what if I want to go back to school? Can you find me something online that I can do? So if I go back to school and I'm in 7th grade, I won't be behind in math. Okay, here. So he went through and did like 4 units of 6th grade math in a day. Right? And I told him, I said, so if you were in school, this would have been like 4 months. Your 4 months of time would have been spent learning what you just did today.
That's right.
Right? And so it's not that I'm against kids learning. It's just, I want that to be something that they enjoy, for something that to be that they are in control of, and for it to make sense, for what they're learning to make sense for what they're living.
Oh my God. It's like so aligned. Like just a few days ago, because I'm really into what is happening in the brain when children are learning. I actually showed my own children a clip of when children are actually learning something, the neurons inside their brain are actually connecting. But here's the funny part. When people are not applying that, the neurons, they actually grow separated. So
if you don't use it, you lose it, right?
Exactly. And a few weeks ago, I interviewed Kelly, which we both know, and she's also an advocate of unschooling. Everyone should definitely check out that interview. I'm going to share the link in the comment section. And she made a very similar comment as what you are talking about, which is that what's the point of learning this if you are not using this right now? Really make learning be dictated by our children's interests as opposed to be by this standardized linear curriculum. I was like, that is just like such a shift in my mind to say, oh, wow, yes, and that. But definitely takes lots of faith, like to follow this, because every day my husband and I were like, are we doing this right? Are they even learning the basics?
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important to go back to like your goals or your visions, right? So if your vision for your family is to have kids who are outperforming all of their peers in school, then you might need to shift, right? But if your vision is to really have peace and harmony in your house, to have kids who are able to advocate for themselves and others, then you're like, does this even matter, right? Does it matter that they only did 10 math problems instead of 100 like I wanted them to do with what we are really about as a family? Like, does that really matter? And I think, when you said something earlier, when you were doing your introduction, you mentioned like being a disruptor. And I'm like, that's what this is, because it gets hard when we're talking to other families, right? And they're like, well, my kid just got the math achievement award in school. And you're like, what do I have? Like, my kid's playing Fortnite all night, right? Like, but they're happy, right? They're at peace. And people see that in my kids. And it's for me, right? Like, the space in this house, it just feels so different. And that is what's important to me, and being able to maintain that and know that my kids, are able to advocate for themselves. Before this call, my son, we talked about something and he was like, I don't really like what we came up with. Can we talk about something different? Can we figure out a different solution to this issue that we're having? And I'm like, yes, after my call, like, come back down and we'll talk about it.
Wow.
Like, that is a skill that they can go out into the world, no matter what field they're interested in, right? And use that to help themselves and to help other people. That's what matters to us.
I so agree. And creative problem solving, learn to learn, right? Learn to learn, because the knowledge may become, obsolete one day, but you have mastered the skill to learn how to learn. I so agree. I just saw this great comment from Jessica, and she has been sharing lots of great comments. Thank you for joining us live. And she said that she has worked with thousands of Chinese students to reconnect with their natural curiosity and the creative problem solving skills. And amen, that I was one of those Chinese students until I came to the United States. To really, I talked so much. Actually, today I was recording my TEDx talk draft video, learning and thinking about my own educational experience of how this traditional, extremely rigorous academic environment actually killed my interest in learning. Absolutely killed my interest in learning. In physics, in math. We spent so many years learning math, and that completely pushed me to the other spectrum, right? I hated math, I hated physics, which is, but still when it comes to my own kid, or like, I just like,
you do the same thing, right? You're like, do all this math, you've got to be good at this, do all this physics, you got to be, and it's like, versus we had a water bottle in our refrigerator, and we usually get like the gallon jugs, and they didn't have them, so it's the one where you have to like poke a hole in the top. And so my kids didn't poke the hole in the top, and the water was coming out all weird. And they're like, why is this happening? I'm like, oh, you got to poke a hole. And they're like, why does that work? And I'm like, I don't know. Go look it up. Something to do with physics, the air pressure. I don't know. Right. But in that moment, they're interested in that because it answered a question that they had in real life, versus me like, oh, come on, we can do these fun labs and we can like, it's not fun. It's not fun when it has no purpose, right? So we try to make it fun and like, oh my gosh, we're going to do this. And they're like, no, I just wanted to know about this one thing. Like, I don't want to do this as a whole unit. I don't want to create a presentation about it. I don't want to make this board to show you what I've learned. I just need to answer this question, right? So give me just a little bit of physics to answer this one question and let me go about my business. And I think a lot of times we push and push and push to make us feel like, oh, okay, they're doing this thing that this person said is important, right? Like they got this physics down, they got this math down, they're writing a letter, so they're practicing their writing skills. But if it doesn't matter to them, then it's still not genuine, right? It's not authentic.
Yeah, definitely 100%. And just the other day, my own kids, they were taking online class, and so the teacher gave them an open-ended question. And because we talk a lot about, hey, go figure it out. So I immediately heard this one little girl, she was asking, give us some instruction. What do you do? What do you want us to do? And I look at my own kid. Yeah, they hear us a lot from saying like, hey, figure it out. They got used to it. But I can see how kids grew up in the traditional learning environment. They're like always waiting for that specific instruction to get them started.
It hurts me so bad. And then when you ask kids like, so what do you think you should do? Right? Or even what do you want to do? And they're like, just tell me what I need to do. And I'm like, no, babe. Like, so they don't even get the sense that they should be able to make their own decisions, right? They don't even have that feeling that they should want to do this thing. And if someone else is asking them to do something different, then they can have that conversation and advocate for themselves. Like, we beat that out of kids. It's just like, sit down and do what I say, and do it exactly how I say it, when I say it, and make sure it looks the way that I want it to look. And that's how we train them. And then high school teachers get so mad. They're like, well, my kids come to me and they don't want to think and they don't want to try. And I'm like, because we don't make that the expectation for them throughout school.
100%.
You can't automatically say, okay, now they're going to switch it on and now it's all going to come back. Like, no.
Yeah. We killed that skill for sure. Yeah. So I'm curious, do you still notice that your children have like fears when it comes to math or physics? Because that is a common thing, right? When you ask most school kids, there's like so much fear, like, oh, math. Everyone gives you this look, oh my God, we're going to do math. So do you still see that in your own kids?
No, my kids don't have that, because they don't. When I see that in other kids and even in adults, it's because at some point someone did something or said something to make them think that math was scary. Right. So maybe it was a teacher who didn't have the skill set or the preparation to really deliver effective content. Right. And really to help the kids understand it. Maybe it was their own parents, right, who shared their math attitudes and put them on their kids. But my kids have fears for sure. Not around math, because I've never made them think that it's something scary. Like, if they can't do it, then we'll figure it out. Right. And so it's always been fun, because that's my attitude around it. There's no pressure. If you don't get it, if you get it wrong, that's fine. If it takes you 10 months to figure this one thing out, that's cool. Like, take the time that you need. So I have the ability to do that, right? To give them the time and the space to look at it from a lot of different lenses. But again, because the math that they do is related to what they are doing in life. So my son learned fractions because he wanted to cook all the time. And there are 6 of us in the family, or 5 of us in the family, and it's never at 5 or 6 on the box. So he had to figure out how to make enough for everybody. Right. And so that's how he learned fractions. It wasn't scary. It was like, okay, I got to get this so that we can cook, so my family can eat. And I know that here's some tools that I can use to help me. And I know that I have my mom here to support me. And so I think that we continue to perpetuate this: math is so scary, math is so hard, math is so whatever. But if we want our kids to have a different attitude, then we have to approach it with a different attitude, right? And so all of my students, I can't say all. I feel like I want to say all, but I won't say all. Most of my students, by the end of the time dealing with me, they might not have loved math, but they weren't afraid of it, right? I told them my goal is to make y'all love it. And even the kids that I tutor, I work with them for 30 minutes. And at the beginning of the session, I'm like, so tell me how you feel about math. And I'm like, oh my God, I hate it. And after 30 minutes, I'm like, tell me how you feel about math. They're like, it's not that bad. It's really not that bad. And I'm like, whether their skill level has increased, at least their math confidence has increased in that 30 minutes. And I think it's just about, like with anything, it's about the attitude that we bring in is what we're going to, share with other people.
That's right. And I love how you make it so relevant to our kids, right? That's what Daniel Pink, he talks about: mastery, autonomy, and purpose, right? There has to be that strong internal purpose. Why do I need to learn this? How can I apply this to make my immediate life better? So I love it. Here's a great question from Alice. Thank you for joining us live. So how do you feel about your children not going to college? I have so much to say about this. Will they ever be prepared for a career? Even relevant to this, how about if they just play games all day long, 3 hours, like, how about their eyes, their, other things? So if you can answer those questions.
Yeah. So if you would have asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have like, what do you mean not going to college? Like, that's not even an option. Like, you go to high school, you do really, really well, so you can get scholarships so that you can go to college. And then you go to college, and so you can get a good job. And now I'm like, that. My daughter was really the one that helped me realize this, because she was really into photography. She had some really bad experiences with teachers in middle school that impacted her confidence. And so high school was like not joyous for her in terms of the workload. And she was really into photography. She was really into dance, and she was more artsy, and which took me a long time to understand, because that's not my brain. Like, I'm math science. And I was like, dude, if you want to be a photographer, you don't really have to go to college for that. Like, you don't need to spend 4 years being stressed about doing this work to be like, go find a photographer be an apprentice and learn under them. And then you can be an amazing photographer. So again, because we've bought into this lie that the only way we can be successful in life is through college and then getting this degree, which is going to prepare us for these, which is not even true anymore, right? Like there are people out here who have bachelor's, multiple master's degrees and still can't find a job, right? And so what is important is to help them figure out what they enjoy doing, how they learn, so that when they are ready to start a job, they're like, oh, I want to be a photographer. Well, I've been taking pictures and studying under this photographer for 4 years. Now I'm ready to start my own business, right? So they still have skill sets that they are learning in place of college. And for me, now I'm okay with my kids saying, I don't think college makes sense for what I want to do. And I'm like, you know what? If you want to be a dancer, you don't have to go to college to do that. If you want to go to college, cool. If you want to be a lawyer, guess what? You're going to have to go to college for that. And so if that's the case, I have one child who I think would make an amazing lawyer, right? That's not what he's saying right now. But if he decides, when he's 16, like, I think I want to be a lawyer, then we start preparing him to take the test to go to college. So it's, for me, it's not mandatory the way it was when I grew up. If that was what makes sense for my kids and what they are doing with their life path, then I'm supporting it. If it doesn't, then I'm not going to force it and require it, because to me, that doesn't make sense.
Perfect answer. I just love you even more now. Like I absolutely agree. I told my kids, like, you have to prove me that college is a good choice. Otherwise, we're not paying for college.
Why? No.
Doesn't make sense at all. I mean, just on this show, I have interviewed dozens of high school dropouts, college dropouts who are feeling really fulfilled, making lots of money. Not only that, but they are generating impact. They're feeling happy about who they are, doing what they love. Because even now, when I look at many of my friends, they're not happy.
No.
They're
miserable. They're miserable. And I think this next generation is going to be so much more prepared, because a lot of us, like, we're in our 40s or 50s having this realization, like, I'm not even happy. I don't be fulfilled. Like, I need to quit my job and do what I love. Our kids are growing up doing what they love. It's not I have to go back to it. It's I get to do this thing, right? So my son, who plays video games all day, I have no idea what he's going to do with life, right? But I know that he will pursue what makes him happy. And if that means he makes a lot of money doing it, great. And if it means that he doesn't, great, right? That's not how I'm going to measure my success. I'm not going to say, all of my kids have these great jobs and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, so I did a good job. They might not be, right? Like, he might just be happy doing what he's doing and surviving, enough to make him happy. I'm okay with that. That will be fine with me.
Wow, that is, kind of wrapping this up, goes back to what we discussed earlier. Parenting is such a self-healing journey, right? Like healing our own expectations, what we want our kids to grow up to be, and but cannot have that separation. Our kids are independent human beings. Yeah. Kind of to follow up on what you were talking about, right, earlier. Like when your boys are playing games like all day long a lot, did that scare you, or do you feel like I need to do something about it, or you guys reach like a mutual agreement, certain number of hours a day, or like, okay.
So there is no certain number of hours a day. There used to be, right? And then I had to realize I had to let go of that control and that fear, because the fear was, if they're always doing this, like, they're never going to get the real learning. And I'm like, but they are learning. Like, there is learning happening with what they're doing. And again, I don't get to dictate what is valuable to them, right? And this is not easy for me. It's still not easy. So there are still struggles when I'm like, really, dude? Like, all you did all day was play video games, right? But again, the fear, if I trace it down, right, or really trace it forward, the fear is that if they just keep playing video games, they're never going to get these other skills that they really need to have this amazing job. But who am I to say that this child is not going to get paid to be a video gamer? I don't know that, right? Who am I to say that the games that he's playing right now are not preparing him to, find this one tweak that he could make that, is worth $1 million. That if all you do is change this in the games, like all these games would be better or faster or more efficient or harder to whatever it is. I don't know. I don't know what jobs are going to be available 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So I can't say that what he's doing is not valuable. I don't know what is going to be valuable or needed even 5 years from now. What I do know is that he's safe, that he's happy, that he's learning to listen to his body. So you mentioned earlier, like, well, what about, like, is it messing up their eyes? They are learning. So he will say, like, I'm going to stop now. You take a break because my eyes are starting to hurt, or because my neck feels a certain way. Like, I need to get up and go outside. Not because I'm telling him. I don't know. I'm not in his body. I don't know when he's feeling uncomfortable, but helping him realize, like, okay, is it time to take a break? Like, you need to get up and move around. He's like, yeah, I think I need to take a break. Right. And so it's, again, releasing that control, which continues, because it's still a journey for me. It continues to be hard, but that's that shift in parenting, right? To say, if I'm really about breaking these toxic patterns, part of that is feeling like I have to always be in control of what they're doing. If I let that go, what will it look like? Right. And part of that toxic pattern is saying that I have to punish my kids or hurt them when they do something I don't like. What might that look like when I let that go? What's another way to respond when they do something that I don't like? Because it's going to happen, right? How I choose to respond is the disruption, right? Me saying, I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to force you to do what I think you should do in this moment, but we're going to talk about it. We're still going to address it, right? And it feels different. And it even feels different. My child asked me today, like, there's an incident with my younger son. He was like, well, why didn't you really give him a consequence for that? Like, why wasn't there a punishment for that? And I'm like, what should it have been? Like, what else could I have done that would have made a difference in that situation? And so talking through, because that's still that mindset of when you do something wrong, you have to hurt to a certain degree in order for it to be addressed. And I'm like, we're moving away. And I used to be like that. So I get why he's asking that, because I used to do it. But that's
I know.
Is saying you can make mistakes and you can make bad decisions, right? Because it's not always a mistake. You can make bad decisions, but you're still worthy of love and respect, and worthy of me to honor you and help you figure out how we're going to do better next time. For me, that's what it's about, and not about making you feel bad for making a bad decision or showing up in a way that doesn't make you proud, because it's not always about me and my ego.
Yeah, I love it. And in fact, like in a few weeks, I'm going to interview this young man. He's only 14 years old, struggles a little bit academically. He still goes to school and struggles with that. But at the same time, he had this great passion for gaming. So he actually developed his own games, got 1 million downloads on multiple games. And he even grew a TikTok community of, like, I don't even remember, 500,000. I was like, wow, what a great skill. At the same time, his parents are, like, I saw a LinkedIn post, like, so concerned about, like, this academic struggle.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting to hear that. And I agree, video games, here, just seeing this coming from Jessica, like, there are lots of studies demonstrating how video games are actually helping our kids and how, like, collaboration, lots of skills. So I love it. I also love how you mentioned earlier, like, our children, they have their own judgment. They trust, like, listen to their own body. Just like our body will give us signals when we need to use the bathroom, to pee, to eat, all those things. So they will be able to feel like, oh, I need a break. My neck hurts from playing games. I love it.
As long as we let them get to that point, right? Because so often we'll intervene and say, all right, go to the bathroom at 3:00, or you have to eat at this time, right? And you have to eat this amount of food, regardless of what if your body is saying, I'm not hungry right now, right? Or that food doesn't make me feel good, but you got to eat it all. You got to finish it all. We disrupt that opportunity for them to learn how to listen to themselves. So again, that's part of being that disruptor in a good way and saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to if you don't want to eat anymore, if you're not hungry right now, okay, listen to your body. And when you're hungry, you get to eat.
I love it. I think I just made a mistake. Last night I was yelling, like, hey, you didn't eat enough. I finished this.
Yeah. And it's like, well, my body's telling me that I ate enough, but I'll sit here and force it.
Imagine someone else did that to you, right? To us, I'll be like, oh my God, that's so suffocating. Yeah. But anyway, what a fascinating conversation. I'm just, like, loving it every single minute. Please do share with us, where can people learn more about you? social media wise, and I have your website here. Yeah.
Yeah, so my website is DomariDickinson.com. I'm also on Instagram under Domari Dickinson and Facebook as Positive and Purposeful Parenting. Oh, yes, thank you. That's it. That's me. That's me.
Yeah, definitely connect with Domari. Like, what a fascinating, incredible conversation you have given us. I feel enlightened, and you have given us, many people here, lots of hope and encouragement, and to inspire us to trust our children more. So thank you for doing that. And everyone, please definitely check her out here: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and website.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. This was so much fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us live. So next Friday or Saturday for some of you, the same time, same location, we are going to have another fascinating conversation to discuss, debate, and disrupt education. Bye.